Hey guys, my name's Austin and welcome to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel. Now in today's video we're going to be doing an overhaul on the cooling system on this 1978 Jeep J10 truck. Currently the water pump decided to start leaking, so I'm just going to go ahead and replace all the components in there while I'm doing the water pump. So let's get started. Alright, so before this video gets started, I do want to mention today's video sponsor, and that is by Sonolight. Sonolight sent out some new LEDs that they have over on Amazon. I'll post a link in the description below on where you can find them. But these ones are the GXE No-Go 7-inch round LED headlights. Now these right here are going to fit most of your Wranglers that have circle 7-inch headlights. And one neat feature about these headlights, other than the LED high beam and low beam, is that it's got these LED rings right here that are for the turn signal and driving light. And if you have a JK, everything is going to be plug and play into the turn signal harness. As you can see right here, we got all the adapters we need, and it looks like we got an adapter over here that may fit a TJ. Now since I do have a Jeep pickup truck with round headlights, these 7-inch lights should fit in there. With these LED headlights, they are a little bit deeper on here, so you may have to do some trimming. That's what the case looks like on my Jeep pickup truck, but I might end up just keeping the classic look on that for now. I'm not going to install these, but overall, if this is the look you're going for, these are definitely a perfect option, and they are pretty bright. So if you guys want to get these 7-inch LED headlights, I got a link in the description below, but right now, let's get to the video. Alright, so these are most of the parts that we're going to be replacing here today. We got our main water pump, which is in this box over here, as well as a new thermostat housing with a new thermostat. Since we're taking off the water pump, which has the mechanical fan on it, I'm also going to be replacing the fan clutch right here, which is thermal activated. And then we're also going to be replacing the upper and lower radiator hose, along with this hose over here that goes to the thermostat to the water pump. And then along with that, we got some new belts over here, since we're going to be taking off all the belts while we're going in there. We're also going to be replacing the radiator since it is pretty corroded and there is some leaks on it. I don't have that here yet. It's going to be coming in real soon, but you guys will see that in this video. So let's go over to the Jeep and we'll see what we're working with and start taking some old stuff apart. Alright, so looking under the engine of the J10, obviously right up here is our radiator, and it looks to be the original one, so definitely need to replace this. Looks like the hoses have been replaced before since they got some CarQuest stickers on them. And then over here where the upper radiator hose leads to, that's going to be our thermostat housing with our thermostat. And then down here we got our mechanical fan clutch and then our water pump right over here. So I'm going to start by draining the cooling system. There's a little petcock on the bottom of the radiator, and hopefully it gets majority of the coolant out. If you're doing this at home, you want to make sure that your engine's nice and cold, so that way you can't burn yourself with the hot coolant. So I'll go drain that out, and then we'll start by unbolting the radiator and getting that out of here. Alright, so on the bottom side of the radiator we have our little petcock. We also do have an inlet and an outlet for our transmission lines. That's only if you have an automatic transmission, so I'm going to have to disconnect those as well. But right now let's drain this. Make sure you have a bucket right underneath so that way it catches all the coolant. Looks like that guy's frozen up, so I'm just going to undo the fitting over here. Alright, so most of that is all drained out now. I'm going to start by undoing the upper radiator hose right here. Looks like they got some aftermarket standard hose clamps, so I'm just going to unloosen that with a flathead. And while we're up here, I'll get this other little hose out of the way that goes from the top of the water pump all the way to the thermostat over here. Unfortunately, I don't have like a little ice pick I can get in there and break the bond with the seal on the rusted surface, so I'm just going to have to get in there manually and kind of break it free. That way it'll be easier to pop off. or you can just cut it if you're not reusing the hose like me. So now we got the lower radiator hose. I'm going to disconnect it here by the radiator first, and I got a bucket right here just in case there's some more coolant. Now I'm going to undo these transmission lines. It looks like someone also put a hose clamp on this as well. So we just got 2 of them. I got an oil pan below here in case some transmission fluid leaks out. Alright, then our last hose that goes to the radiator is just our overflow hose right here. And that guy just slides off where the radiator cap goes. We'll put that to the side. And now we're ready to unbolt the radiator from the radiator support. They got a total of 4 9/16 bolts that go in from the back side over here. This one only has 3, so I'm going to start taking it out, and then we should be able to remove the radiator. And they're actually a 1/2 inch. So once you're in the last bolt, make sure you have a hand on the radiator so that way it doesn't fall down. Now I can just lift this out of here. And look how gross this guy is. Alright, so now that we got the old radiator out, we got a lot more room to work in here. I'm going to wait on putting the new one in until we get everything up here all replaced. So the next thing I'm going to do is take off the belts. We got one over here for the power steering and then one down here for the alternator. So I'm going to crack free the adjustment bolts, and then we should be able to rotate the power steering pump inward as well as the alternator, and that way it should give us some slack to pull off the belts. So on the back side of the power steering, there's some 9/16 nuts that we're going to break free. Alright, so with that pushed in, we got some slack on the belt, and now we can just pull it off the pulley over here, and then take it off the rest of the pulleys around the water pump as well as the crank. And there's one. And then for the alternator, we're going to crack the top bolt free, and then loosen the bottom one as well. Slide it inward, and then pop off the belt. And there we go. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to work on is removing the mechanical fan clutch and fan from the water pump. So we got 4 nuts over here, and I already sprayed some knocker loose penetrating oil on there to soak in, and hopefully we can break these free. And then once the fan and fan clutch is off, I can remove the clutch off the fan while it's on the workbench. It'll be a lot easier to put the new one on. So you can only fit really a wrench in here. These are 1/2 inch, so I'm going to see if they pop free. Alright, so all of them are broken free. I'm going to work on just taking the rest of it off. Alright. Now we should also be able to take this pulley, work it off like that. So now we got some room. I'm going to finish and take off the rest of this lower radiator hose. Now over here we got a heater core hose, so I'm just going to undo that. So the reason why I'm actually replacing this water pump is because over here where the mechanical fan is hooked up to and the pulley, the bearing that's inside here is actually pretty much toast. While the engine was running, you could see that pulley wobble back and forth a lot, and there's a bunch of grinding noise. And if you just take this, you can hear how loose that bearing is inside. And then just recently it also began to leak right here, right outside this bearing. Alright, so now I'm going to begin unbolting the water pump from the engine block. And it looks like we mostly just have some 7/16 bolts going into the engine over here. We also have it tied into the power steering bracket over here, and it looks to be like a 9/16 or a ½ inch, and the same thing over here with an alternator. So I'm just going to start taking off bolts, and if we have to move some stuff around to be able to get it out, we'll do so. So I'm just going to break them free by hand first, so that way they hopefully won't snap. Alright, so I'm on the last bolt now, and I got pretty much the alternator as well as power steering unbolted from the water pump. I had to loosen up all the bolts that go from the power steering pump and kind of move it out of the way, and then same thing over here down by the alternator. So now once again, make sure you have something to catch up all the antifreeze below, and we'll pull off this water pump. So right here is exactly what you don't want to see. The inside propeller for the water pump was actually making an indentation here because the bearing was bad, had a lot more movement, and wasn't constrained on its axis. So good thing we're replacing it now before it gets even worse. But the amount of play right here is just terrible in this water pump. Alright, so I'm going to go and clean off this old gasket surface over here. I'm probably just going to use a brass wire wheel, that way it's not too abrasive and doesn't damage the metal too much. Now it looks like the previous owner used some RTV on this. I'm not going to be using RTV for this. I'm just going to be using a paper gasket. On my Jeep Cherokee water pump video, that's the most top asked question, is why don't I use RTV when it comes to water pump seals? And honestly, because they haven't come from the factory with any RTV. They've been using paper gaskets for the longest time, and as long as you got two clean mating surfaces and it's properly torqued down, it shouldn't leak at all. If you have any problems in the future where you maybe have uneven or damaged sealing surfaces, then it would be okay to use some RTV. But for this, I'm going to use a paper gasket, and hopefully it should hold, and if not, I'll have to go back with some RTV. Alright, so I got the gasket surface all cleaned up, and I went and took some mineral spirits and made sure any oily residue was off of there. Same with the new one, because they do have some oil when they ship it out, so that way it doesn't rust on the surface. I went and took the old bolts and cleaned them up with a wire wheel because they were a little bit rusty. I put some anti-seize on there, so that way if I have to take this off again, they won't snap off into the block. While I was at it, I put some new lock washers on there since the old ones were all crimped down. So now we're ready to put the new water pump on. I basically have my new gasket right here. I'm just going to have to feed it behind there and line up the holes as I put the new water pump on. Alright, so we got the majority of the bolts back into the new water pump, and over here, right where we're attaching the alternator bracket, one thing I noticed with this water pump is that these holes actually sit a little bit lower, so it's not exactly the same as the old water pump. But with this kit, they actually came with little spacers right here that we're going to utilize to help pull out the bolt a little bit, so that way everything sits where it should with all the bracketry. So for these spacers, we got this bigger one, and we're going to put that up here on the top side, and then the smaller one's going to go below, and that's going to tie into our alternator bracket. This is going to go between the alternator bracket and the water pump. Alright, so I got that water pump all tightened down. I went in a crisscross pattern all the way around and tightened them up nice and tight. Nothing crazy tight because I don't want these to strip out. So before we put all the rest of the stuff back together up here, I want to take off the thermostat housing, replace that as well as the thermostat inside there. It looks like we just got two 1/2-inch bolts, so let's go and take that off. So if you still have the factory smog pump on here, you're going to have this vacuum connection over here. You're going to have to take off the lines for that. They just simply pull off. With my Jeep, the smog pump system has all been deleted, so I don't have to worry about that, and I'm not going to be putting the sensor back on here with the new one. With the new thermostat housing, it actually did come with a plug, so that's what we're going to be using. Alright, so now we got our thermostat, which I can take a screwdriver and pop it out of place. Then we got our old gasket too. Now I'm going to take a brass wire wheel, just clean up the surface right here, and then we should be ready to put the thermostat and housing back together. Alright, so I got that gasket surface all clean on there. Now I've got our new thermostat, and that's going to sit right down here. It's going to lock into that ridge. And then we got our gasket right here, just going to line that up. And then we got our new thermostat housing. I went and painted it with some engine paint just to keep some corrosion off. And then I got our plug right here. I put some Teflon tape on there so it doesn't leak. And now we're just going to throw this on top of here and line up the gasket with it. Then I got some new 5/16 hardware, and we'll feed that into place. Alright, so change of plans. That gasket actually did not line up with the bolt holes at all. It was just a really crappy gasket, and the holes were about 3/16 of an inch off. So instead I just cut off those little areas of the gasket where the bolts go through, and I put a thin coat of RTV around both sides of the gasket, and then I put it on the where the bolts are on the bottom of the thermostat housing. So now I'm going to retry and get this bolted down. Alright, so I got our new molded hose right here that goes from the water pump all the way to the thermostat housing. So I got some new hose clamps, so we can stick that on while we're all in here. Alright, so now for this heater hose down here, we're going to put this onto the new water pump. I like to put a little bit of WD-40 just on the inside of the tube right here. That way it helps kind of get it on there a lot better. And most likely in the future I'm going to be replacing these heater hoses, but for now I'm just going to reuse them. Now we can get our hose clamp and start tightening it up. Alright, so this is our new radiator that we're going to be replacing the old one with. This is off of eBay by GPI Racing. It's probably a Chinese one. I only got it for like 160 bucks, but everything so far seems to be of high quality. Nice welds on here, and as long as it holds, that's good for me. They also did come with some transmission fittings, which are like barb fittings, which is actually going to be perfect for me because I'm just going straight to a rubber hose. Because the radiator that was in the truck here, it looked like it's probably been replaced before, since these transmission lines are kind of cut and they just had the rubber hose going over it. So these barb fittings will be a little bit better for that. It also comes with a petcock right here, so we're going to install that before we install the radiator into the truck. Since it's located on the bottom, will be a little bit easier. Alright, so I got that drain plug in there, and I'm just going to put the barb fittings on for the transmission over here, since it is going to be a little bit easier with this out of the Jeep. So we got these shipping caps, we just got to take them off. And then I already put some Teflon tape on here, so they shouldn't leak when we install this. I got some new 5/16 hardware. I'm just going to feed into place with some AMCs. Alright, that's bolted down. Nice and solid. Now we can start hooking up some hoses. Alright, so now I'm going to install the lower radiator hose, and from the old hose I was able to actually take out the spring that was inside it. This is important because once you're under heavy load on the engine, sometimes the water pump actually collapses this lower hose because it's sucking in so much coolant, and it'll actually starve the engine of antifreeze. So I'm going to install this in our new hose. Then I got two new hose clamps on here, and then we're going from the bottom of the water pump to the bottom of the radiator. Now they got this protective cap that's over the radiator hose inlet. Once it's on there, we can start tightening up the clamps. Alright, so before I put that upper hose on, I want to get the fan and fan clutch installed onto the water pump. It'll make it a little bit easier without the upper radiator hose in place. And with the bolts that go into the water pump and the pulley, the nut is actually supposed to come off, but actually came out with the whole stud. So I'm thinking once I get this fan unbolted from the clutch, it should come off. These are just some half-inch bolts, and our new clutch actually came with some new hardware over here. So let's go and pop these off. Not really that tight. And there we go. Make sure you know which way your fan's facing, otherwise it's going to be pushing the air the wrong way. We got our studs out. Beautiful. And this new hardware has some lock washers, so we'll throw that on there as well. Alright, so with that clutch back on there, we're pretty much ready to put the fan and clutch back onto the new water pump. Alright, so I got those studs in there and Loctited in place. So now we got our water pump pulley. We're going to slip that on. And then we can slip our fan on. And then I got some new lock washers and nuts, and we'll tighten this up. Alright, that fan's on there good and absolutely no play. Definitely an improvement from last time. So now I'm going to get the upper radiator hose on. Got the clamps orientated how I want them. Got the shipping cap, I'll take that off. Alright, now I just got our coolant overflow tube. We'll hook that up here by the radiator cap. And before I finish up everything else, I'm going to start filling this with water first. I'm going to do a 50-50 mix between distilled water and concentrate antifreeze. But I'll start off the water just in case there is any leaks, so we can easily get in here before we put the rest of the stuff in. Alright, so coolant's all topped off. I had to run and get some more. I went and threw the belt on, and it was a little bit tedious trying to get the nuts tightened up on the back of the power steering pump. Since it's adjustable on its bracket, it's hard to get a wrench back there, but I basically doubled up on the belts over here with brand new belts since I don't have the smog pump on here anymore, so I was able to utilize one of the grooves here on the pulley. Got a new belt for the alternator down here and tightened that up. Now I wanted to replace the pulley over here in the power steering because it's actually bent really bad, but that's just going to have to wait for another video because that pulley didn't come in time. But now we're pretty much ready to go to start this thing up and then top off the coolant once again once it's circulating. I'm also going to top off the transmission fluid since we lost a little bit when we took off those lines for the radiator. With this transmission, we're going to fill it up with Dexron 3 because that's what it calls for. So I'm going to start this up and then we'll top off the fluids and maybe we'll take it for a little ride. Alright guys, that is going to be a wrap for today's video. As you saw, the J10's running great. I drove it around and took it on its first long trip that I've driven with it, which is around 20 miles, and everything seemed to be working great. The only working gauge on it is the temperature gauge, and that seemed to stay right in the middle, no overheating at all, and no leaks from the system. I will have to go back later and replace that pulley and fix the strip threads on that alternator bolt, but that's going to be in a later video. As always, I'll post a link in the description below on all the parts I use in this video. I will also put that link for those lights if you guys are interested in those 7-inch round LED headlights. If you guys want to help support the channel, I got some Out Jeeping vinyl decals over on the Etsy Out Jeeping shop. I got some J10 decals as well as some XJ decals that you guys can purchase. Now looking at the future, we're going to take a break on the J10 for a while, and we're going to start working on the red Cherokee again. So make sure you guys stay tuned for the next video. If you have any questions or comments, make sure to post them below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.